2 weeks afterwards, something really strange happened. I've never heard anybody else report this.
Steve, how did you find Carnivore?
Slowly. It was a long journey. I grew up on a farm and was very fit all through my young years, but we ate a typical New Zealand Kiwi farmer diet, which was hugely heavy in carbohydrate. And but because we're very busy, very active, it never really affected me at all, that I thought. And quite frankly, if you asked me, I would have said I was fit and healthy through pretty much all my life, right up until really a few weeks after going carnivore, when I suddenly realised that I absolutely had no idea what good health was. But prior to that, I did pretty well. But I could tell by the mid-20s, 27 especially, I was starting to put weight on. I was developing a pot belly. I had constant nagging minor problems all the way through since I was 5 years old, like, the digestive system that didn't quite function properly, hay fever, sensitivity to house mite dust, touches of asthma, acne, all just lots of things that were just annoying. And a lot of sort of physical characteristics that I found afterwards just were completely unnecessary in terms of what I put up with. Anyway, once I got married and got into my second marriage actually and started having children, we were both, my wife and I, were putting weight on, and we just sort of started. I'd been researching diet and testing different things for really pretty much my early 30s, and really were not without much success. I'd tried going vegetarian for 2 years. That stopped when my wife got pregnant with our first child, and she absolutely needed to eat meat. I'd be booted out of the door Sunday morning at 8 o'clock and don't come back until you've got a meat pie sort of thing. And I'd never gone back to it because after 2 years, I'd pretty much pushed it to the limit, and I could tell that really nothing had changed. I hadn't really deteriorated in health, but I certainly hadn't improved. So then I tried just about every way of eating, and even a few from unconventional ones. Like I spent 2 years just eating once a day. That was the evening meal, and nothing changed. Not my weight didn't change. My general health issues didn't change, because what I was eating at night was still heavily carbohydrate loaded. And all the way through, as I started to turn in my late 40s, I started getting arthritis. In my 50s, I got to the point where it was starting to become difficult to lead the active lifestyle that I was used to, climbing mountains or even stairs, or it just simply didn't get better. I realized that sort of in my early 50s that sugar was pretty bad, so I cut all refined sugar out of my diet. And because at the age of 50 I was diagnosed as type 2 diabetic, not type 2 diabetic, I was pre-diabetic, but I was verging on the edge of type 2 diabetic. And so by cutting out sugars, I sort of staved off the transition into full diabetes for about 10 years until I reached 60. And at that point, I just have to describe myself as just an old, buggered old man. I was just overweight. I'd got to a point where I couldn't bend over and put my socks on, or had trouble trimming my toenails. And that was a real sort of limit for me. Now, I never really suffered from huge weight. Like many of the stories of people that you've had on have had enormous weight losses. I never really got super heavy. I reached 90 kilos. But the physical challenges were serious enough that it triggered me to actually get serious about doing it, especially when I was diagnosed as pre-diabetic at 60. And at that point, my best friend was type 2 diabetic, and he'd been type 2 diabetic for about 20 years. And I just simply didn't want to go down that path. I saw the physical and emotional and health and mental challenges he was going through, and that was quite horrifying, quite frankly. So I thought I'd better do something about it. So a lot of research on the web, as a lot of people do, and drifted into keto. And that certainly helped. That stabilized things. Oh, the other thing at 60, the other thing that was really a big trigger for me was that I'd just sit on the couch watching TV in the lounge, and I couldn't get up. I'd have to roll sideways and push myself up with my arms because my knees, hips, and indeed the muscle pain in the muscles of my leg was so severe, it just hurt too much. I literally couldn't just lean forward and stand up. That's what I mean by being an old and buggered old man. I was getting to the point where I really wasn't able to function properly anymore. And I live a very active lifestyle, so that was sort of not okay. Anyway, I drifted into keto, and that helped a bit. So it certainly staved off the type 2 diabetes. But I could still tell that it wasn't really solving the issues that were just gradually getting slightly worse. And the more I researched it, the more it went down the path. These were just metabolic issues. Anyway, I've somehow came across Michaela Peterson's first video that she put up on YouTube. That was just basically blew me away. She was very inspiring, especially her journey and the way that she actually came to an all-meat-based diet and the effect that it had, and also the impact it had on her when she fell off the wagon. And after a few weeks of thinking about this, I sat back and I thought, well, why don't I just give it a go? Now I'm sitting in this environment here with no support at all, nobody. when I went to a meat diet, everybody was completely and utterly horrified. And for 2 years afterwards, my wife kept checking me for scurvy because I just wasn't getting enough vitamin C, according to her. Anyway, now it's been nearly 8 years later, she's finally had to concede that, okay, maybe you're not going to get scurvy. But I just figured at the end that if I tried it, give it a go, and what's the worst that could happen? I'm only one meal away from reverting back to what I was. So if any sort of significant problems popped up, it's not going to be catastrophic. And certainly nowhere near the problems that I was just simply living with every day. So I changed. And as I said, everybody was horrific. And just like a lot of people, I went into the evangelical stage after a few weeks because of the benefits. But that's past, fortunately. But the first 2 weeks were pretty good. I'd say the biggest struggle I've had ever since that transition would be sugar addiction. That's been an ongoing challenge, which I'll cover shortly. And it's probably the most difficult thing I've ever actually tried to cope with in my life. And I've done an awful lot of weird things in my time, but that's been the most difficult challenge is coping with sugar addiction and the desperate demand to have a chocolate or a cup of Milo or something when you're walking around at night. So, but one thing that happened 2 weeks after the transition, remember I had already been keto for a couple of years, but the move to full meat-based diet, which was just simply beef, eggs, and at that point I wasn't even eating bacon, I was just simply eggs and beef with other types of meat thrown in here and there just for variety, and water. That was it. 2 weeks afterwards, something really strange happened. I've never heard anybody else report this, but I was pretty tired one night. I'd still work a full-time job, even though I'm 70 now. I went to bed about 8 o'clock, which is pretty early. And for the next 8 hours, my whole body, literally from top to bottom, right down to my toes, every single cell in my body felt like it had a blowtorch shining on it. It was on fire. It was just burning right through. Now, I didn't feel any sort of sense of worry or panic. it just was such an incredibly weird change that was going on, and I didn't figure out what it was for quite some time afterwards. But about 4 o'clock in the morning, it went away and everything was perfectly normal. I believe now that was the transition from a sugar-based or glucose-based metabolic burning in the mitochondria to a fat-based. But after that, quite a number of changes suddenly became quite apparent. The first was a month before I did the transition. We have a walk that my wife and I do. It involves a hill that's about sort of 4 stories high, very, very steep. You need boots to keep your feet. And normally, and I've been like this when I've been tramping mountains all over New Zealand, I can walk up a hill, but I get 4 or 5 steps, and then you get that lactic acid burn in your muscles. You just got to stop, let it go away, and you take another 4 or 5 steps up a steep hill. And that was just the way I climbed it. It was fine. I get to the top, no problem. About 2 months after the transition, I went for another walk and just happened to include this hill in it. Started at the bottom, expecting the usual lactic acid buildup, and there was nothing. I just walked without stopping from bottom to top. Now, I was breathing hard because I put a lot of, it's a steep hill and there's a lot of work involved in getting up there, but no lactic acid burn, and I haven't had that lactic acid burn since. And it's one of the most freeing effects because as I said, I'm 70. I can go out with other people that are a lot younger than me in their 20s and 30s, and I can climb a hill without stopping, and they're all lagging behind because they're completely shot. In fact, the first time I went out walking with my brother, who's 18 months younger than me, he was, after a 2-hour walk around a farm, he was exhausted, and I was ready to go around again. That's not because I'm fit. I sit in front of a computer screen most of the time. I found just the physical improvements brought about by eating what I would call the cleanest diet in the world has left me in a state where I'm metabolically fitter than I've ever been. So that was one factor. The other factor is that all my life I've always been a cold, feeling the chill. And generally, if I'm working in an office, I need a temperature of about 23 degrees or so. By the time it gets down to 18, I'm starting to rattle, starting to get shaking with cold. And that's the way I've spent my whole life, literally from as far back as I can remember. After that transition to burning ketones or fat burning, I call myself an oil burner these days, like a diesel. and I found out by watching various people, I've got a list of them here, that ketone metabolism is basically exothermic. In other words, it releases heat, while glucose metabolism is actually dead neutral, so you don't release heat. So to release heat, you actually have to exercise to burn the ATP that you generate in your muscles. Just generating the ATP with ketones creates heat. And that's exactly what I found. I'm hot most of the time. I find hot weather like we've got in New Zealand right now quite difficult to cope with. But I can walk out and walk around a farm, neighbour's farm, at 12 degrees and nothing but a short and T-shirts, and it's comfortable. And everybody else, I go out to functions or whatnot, and I'm in a short and T-shirts, and everybody else are wrapped up in their puffer jackets, and I'm quite comfortable. So the whole exothermic effect is really quite amazing. And that makes it a lot easier, certainly easier to manage until you're in Rome in the middle of summer and it's 45 degrees. It gets hard. So I transitioned and was pretty good for about 2 years, and I just loved the changes. I'll just pull up some of the changes that I actually observed. I'll just rattle off a list of things that basically changed radically after that transition, after that night of the flaming cells, basically. I lost all the allergies, house mite dust. I was always very sensitive to it. The allergic reaction, which is constricted breathing, the mucus generation and all that. Again, dust and pollen, all that's gone. Arthritis, hands, shoulders, knees, hips. In the past, in the late 90s, I'd completely destroyed my arms up to my shoulders, including frozen shoulder. I thought I was going to lose my career at that point. By the time I was 50, I thought I was going to need knee and hip replacements. By the time I was 60, I was getting even more certain of that. 2 years later, it all went. It's gone. And I'm still charging around farms all over the place, doing all sorts of exercise. And my brothers had to go in, younger than me, had to go in and get a hip replacement. Other people around me are getting knee replacements and so on. Just completely unnecessary. Bloating after every meal, I was always felt overloaded, but still hungry, not satisfied. So you could eat a pizza until it was just coming out your ears, but still never actually felt comfortable. And then go to bed and try to sleep with this feeling of a distended belly. It was horrible. Then that sort of translated into lower bowel distress. Like for me, it's been perfectly normal for probably nearly 20 years prior, to go to the toilet 5 times a day with cramping and diarrhea. It didn't seem like it was much of a big deal at the time. I mean, it's just how it was. It didn't really debilitate me in any way. Congestion, I was a really snotty-nosed child, and heavy congestion all the way up, literally from as far back as I can remember, right through until I transitioned to carnivore, and then that stopped completely. So no nose, lungs, throat, all that build-up of phlegm gone. Wax build-up in ears gone, morning crusts gone, skin sclerosis, which I suffered with for 30 years, and doctors just couldn't do a damn thing about it, except in one case prescribed one of the strongest steroids. Yeah, when another doctor saw what I was using, he nearly fell over and out of his chair because it was so potent. But for 20 years, it let me sleep at night because the sclerosis was so serious. Overweight, as I said, I only got up to 90 kilos, but it was uncomfortable weight, and I wasn't happy with it. Since changing to carnivore and recently gone back to more purified form of carnivore, I've dropped right down until a week ago. I'm now at 84, and it seems to have plateaued. That looks like that's
And
my bottom
how
line.
tall are you?
5'6".
So yeah, that must have been uncomfortable, because I'm like 5'8", and at 90 something kilos, I would have been really uncomfortable. I was really uncomfortable.
Yeah, I was uncomfortable. As I said, difficult getting my socks on. To me, having to get somebody to put my socks on, that wasn't okay. And yet my best friend actually, Steve, who had been diabetic for 20 years, full-blown diabetic, he had reached 110 kgs, and he was exact same height as me. And again, I could see the path he was going down, and unfortunately, he chose not to change anything and died of complications from diabetes in November last year. So, I mean, the consequences were pretty darn clear to me. And as part of that evangelical period, I tried very hard for 2 years to try and convince Steve to just do the research and read up and learn something and try and change his diet, because he was my hunting buddy and he was completely destroyed physically. He never did. And the consequences is the fact that he lost his life at the age of 69. So that was gum disease. Well, gum disease and tooth decay. I was told as an 18-year-old that I'd have false teeth before I was 30. Well, here I am 70 and I've still got my own teeth. I haven't had a single filling cavity since I started carnivore for the last 8 years. The dentist, I don't think, can quite understand it. Certainly, I've had a couple of fillings fall out and they've replaced them, but the last one they replaced just a couple of months ago, they said, "Oh, no, that's easy to do. You don't have any decay, so we'll just pop a new filling in and away we go." Muscle burn, yeah. General colds and flus, I hardly ever get sick now. The other ones that were really, sleeping improves and all that sort of thing as well. But one that really surprised me, or two actually that surprised me, is that I'm now sunburn resistant. I've always been, especially rearing kids, very conscious of the whole cancer scare and the damage at UV, especially in New Zealand. Quite frankly, I can now go out and help on the local airfield, towing gliders around all over the place and working out there in full sunlight. And I might come back with a very slight tinge of red. Before the conversion, I would have been burnt to a crisp unless I was using sunblock. Just don't get burnt. The other thing that surprised me was actually that I've always been very prone to seasickness. I've literally, physically made myself seasick in our own swimming pool, just by swimming. I make the joke that I can get seasick in a bathtub. But a couple of years ago, we went for a trip to Vietnam, and I got a chest infection in Ho Chi Minh City, and I was like that for most of the trip. But towards the end of the trip, we went out on a boat ride where my wife wanted to do some snorkeling. Because I had a chest infection, I couldn't go under the water, so I sat in the boat, and we were basically bouncing around all over the place in about a 1 metre swell. And about an hour or so into this, I sort of looked around and I thought, hey, I don't feel sick. What's going on? Because I was expecting to be, feeding the fish by that point. So I don't know what's happened to that or why that is, but it certainly, I don't get seasick anymore. The other thing I found was interesting was I always thought I was a pretty positive sort of guy, but I'd say now I was just a grumpy old bugger compared to what I am today. Just general grumpiness is all I can really say. Not bad temper, just grumpy, just not happy inside. But after the conversion to the whole carnivore diet, I just couldn't believe the sense of joy that you can wake up with and have all day long. And even in the face of quite serious adversity, I can still laugh and make a joke because I just feel great inside. And that, to me, I think has been one of the biggest pluses that I've ever, certainly never anticipated, but I certainly appreciate now. So that's sort of the list of that. While in the early days, I did a lot of research because I'm a sort of scientist at heart. And I looked at the basis for a carnivore diet as a fundamental requirement for human health. And I looked at it across 11 different vectors: metabolism, ancestral research, historical fossil research, land use from a regenerative point of view, nutritional balance and availability of nutrients, long-term health, population health trends, human physiology, food safety and toxicity, socioeconomic, industrial, profit motive, all of those things. I looked at them, and there's dozens and dozens of vectors on each of those core areas. I never found anything support plant food except two factors. And people don't believe me these days. The two factors I could find that supported plants in your diet is one, for it's better than starving, famine. In other words, I'd rather eat a loaf of bread if I was facing starvation, or a cabbage or a potato. But if I had a choice, no. The other one, which is an interesting one because I think it's a very powerful motivator these days, certainly it is a key factor in my wife's resistance to it, and that's entertainment. She was shocked when I told her that. And what does entertainment mean? It's just the huge variety of flavors and colors and textures that you can get with a plant-based diet. So one of the things I was expecting when I went carnivore was that it was going to be very boring. And it's now been 8 years, and I expected 8 years of sirloin steaks. You're going to have to call a limit somewhere. But I found that when your body's actually being nutritional needs are being met, you don't get sick of it. I probably eat 1 or 2 sirloin steaks every day, and I enjoy each and every one of them as good as the first one. You just don't get sick of them. So
it's a very strange feeling, right? Because if you were eating lettuce every day. I mean, not
Oh,
that
I
it'd be
did.
all that exciting the first time, but if you were, you'd eventually go, I'm really tired of this lettuce.
That was the cycle I went through, especially I can remember it at breakfast time. I'd have wheat bix and yogurt. I get absolutely fed up with that. So I'd go to porridge and I'd have a few weeks of that. And I get absolutely to the point where I just cannot face another bit of porridge, change to something else. And that's what I was expecting would be the pattern that repeated. It just doesn't. So that was that side. During that period, though, I've always been a fruit addict. I love fruit, always have right from the beginning. And probably after the first 2 years, I started to drift back into a bit of extra fruit in my diet, and I found that that was more damaging than I realised. I thought, well, how bad can an apple a day be? Well, I found out because up until about 2 months ago, all my weight came back on. I reached 89.5 kilos again. Nothing more than just a little bit of fruit, maybe a few feijoas in season, an apple a day, very occasional orange. That's all it took. And so when I hit that, getting close to hitting that 90 kilo mark again, I thought I've just got to do something different. So I got myself a glucose monitor. That was a prick the finger type thing. Tried using that to try and find out what effect different foods had on me. It didn't work very well because you can't see the change over sort of periods of time, like an hour or two, without actually ending up with a finger that looks like a pincushion. So I splashed out and got a constant glucose monitor, CGM. I only needed to have it on for 15 days, which is when it expired. But in that time, it became so clear what the impact was that an apple had, what the impact was that I went out to a funeral and ate a club sandwich. It's just a little bit of bread, just a little bit of thing. And next thing, I'm up into the danger zone from the glucose. It just spikes it like I just couldn't believe. We use Kiwi measurements here, so I was basically cruising around about the 4s and 5s most of the time when I'm eating pure. But one club sandwich and I went up to 11, and it came down fairly quick. But what I found is that after eating a little bit of glucose-based food like that, it would take 2, 3, 4 days to actually settle right back down to where it should be. So it showed me very clearly what the long-term impact was. And from that, I could actually test various foods that I'd been taking for granted that would have minor effects in the past. Some didn't have an effect, others did. And so I've now become a lot more focused in terms of avoiding those items that push me up. And that's had a big impact. As soon as I started that program, I started losing half a kilo every 5 days, 4 to 5 days. It just fell off. And until I hit 84 kgs, and then it just basically hit rock bottom, and that's where I am now. So I've got a good basis. Oh, the other change I made to reach that is I went to intermittent fasting. So I had breakfast and I eat about 1 or 2 o'clock, and then that's it until breakfast the next morning. And that has worked well. What I'm be experimenting with next is to see whether or not I can introduce a bit more food at night to see if that maintains my weight or not. If it doesn't, then we can go back to what I was doing now. So during that, the other thing that was a unexpected benefit, I survived 2 COVID infections pretty well. I had one day where it felt like a bit of a head cold, but I came out of those quite well. But I did have 2 pretty serious accidents. One was in January 2020. I don't know if you've heard of them, but electric unicycles. Electric unicycle is literally that. It's a unicycle that balances itself like a Segway. And the one I've got, that's got a top speed of 70 kilometres an hour and a range of about 70 or 80 kilometres. So I can tear around on this thing at quite a pace, fully kitted out in sort of motorbike level gear. But January 2020, I was commuting home from Napier, and I got taken out by an off-duty policeman on a bicycle. he, he had a major wobble. It caused me to come down in a crashing heap, and I smashed the top of my shoulder here. The rotator cuff just got turned into junk and smashed just above my ankle on my left leg. So I got thrown in hospital there for 3 weeks. They pinned everything up. My upper arm here looks like a mad fencer has been at work with the nails. Same with my leg. There's just nails in every direction, and they'll be there for life. But I went. The people in the hospital couldn't believe how quickly I healed, and the surgeon who finally decided to reconstruct the shoulder rather than replacing it with a plastic or a titanium one. I went back to him it was about 9 months later for a checkup, and he couldn't believe the healing that had gone on. And quite frankly, he told me I would never get more than 80% of the use of this arm back, so I would only ever be able to get to about here. Well, I got no problem going right up to the top, same as the other arm. I don't even know it's injured anymore. Same thing with my left leg. I got out of hospital. I was then 6 weeks in a wheelchair because you can't use crutches when you've got a broken shoulder, and with a broken leg, I couldn't get around. So I was in a wheelchair around home for 6 weeks. my wife having to assist me into the shower and on and off the toilet sort of thing. But that was finished around about March or so. By June or July, I was able to walk up. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. There's a mountain called Roy's Peak in Wanaka. It's about 5,000 feet, virtually straight up. And it took 4 hours to climb it and 2 hours to come back down. I was completely shattered at the end of it. But this was the first real exercise I'd done for over 6 months, 8 months really. And I still think it was probably a bloody stupid thing to do, but I still managed to get to it. It was from Lake Wanaka right up beyond the snow line, right to the snow-capped peak, and then back down again. So physically, my body dealt with it. Then the next thing that actually happened was that it must have been about October last year. I was helping out at the gliding club. I just help out recording landings and picking up gliders, and when they land and pull them back to where they're going to take off again using a small airfield tractor. This thing's a small Ford. It's about 1,200 kilograms in weight. I was showing a young guy how to what gears to use. So I was leaning over the back tire, just pointing over, and the engine was running at around at a fast idle, and we still don't know why, and he doesn't know why, but he slammed it into third gear. It was all over in about a second and a half. I felt the tire dragging me down. Fortunately, it threw me sideways rather than running up the length of my body, because I think if it ran up the length of my body and over my head, I wouldn't be here now. It threw me sideways, climbed my upper thigh, and I knew I was in trouble because the pressure on that leg was just immense. Then it bounced over and ran diagonally across my hips and came down off the other side. Carted me off to hospital. That was about sort of 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Carted me off to hospital, x-rays, CT scan, and at 6 o'clock that night, the doctor and a nurse came back in. They were just shaking their head. They said, "There's no damage. There's no broken bones, none. Not a broken bone anywhere. That damn tractor ran clean over the top, and I was fine. In fact, they booted me out of bed, even though I was very reluctant. They booted me out of bed and got me walking around the ward. Now, the muscle on my outside of my thigh was trashed. I couldn't even lift my leg, and it was extremely painful. But 3 weeks later, I'm back to normal. Didn't even know I'd been injured 3 weeks later. So
that's amazing.
That's what happens when you've got a healthy body. And I reckon I'm healthier now than I've ever been since I was sort of 4 years old.
It's It's amazing. So I've got to ask though, what does your wife say about all this? Like when you're in and out of hospital like that, but you're continuing to have the same amount of energy. Does that not tempt her a little bit to give it a try?
Well, she's been so imbued with the traditional concept that you need fruit and veggies for good health. It's just fundamental to her nature. And the thought of just eating dead stuff is, she just can't face it. But she's had her own health scares, which is her story to tell, not mine. And she's struggled since 13 years old with weight. And I've been trying to help her with that, but she just won't make the final step and go the full way. And I know from my own experience, until you make that final step and remove all plant-based products out of your dietary habits, you just don't get the real big benefits that are possible. And I don't care who they say, if you're on any form of keto. I mean, I found brassicas, especially kale, spinach, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, that sort of thing, just flared up my sclerosis like you wouldn't believe. Cut them out, it would settle all down. Have one meal of it, flares all back up again. I can't drink coffee for the same reason. I'd love to. So a lot of foods I really enjoy. A lot of foods I just said I can't do it because the cost, the health cost, is just not worth it. And if I have to put up with a bit of boredom, then so be it. But I've never tried, even though I've tried eating one meal a day. What I haven't done is just eat breakfast and dinner, lunch, and then skip dinner. I've never done that before. But you get so much time back in the evening. I give up work and I head off charging out. I'll for a walk, or I'll go out onto a mate's farm to do some hunting or whatever it is. Head out on the wheel and go for a ride because I'm not preparing food. I'm not eating. I'm not trying to digest it afterwards. And I'm not hungry. So I just get up and go.
Yeah, it completely changes everything, and especially I find one of the biggest benefits for me is getting that time back and having the energy along with that time, and you
Mm,
just life becomes so much more efficient and productive without you actually having to do anything to make it that way.
that's right. That's right. And as I said, because I'm working IT, I'm in an office-bound job. I've never been very good at the whole exercise. I have tried going to the gym a few times, and God almighty, that just bores me to tears. But I found once I went carnivore that you keep an innate level of fitness. And I'm now fitter now at 70 than I was at 60. And I'm hoping I'm as good as this when I hit 80, quite frankly. And I don't see any reason why not.
So you're still working full time? Like, are you working remotely?
Yes, I design, build, support computer systems, which is a bit unusual for a character my age. So I do know what a mouse is. I do know how to type. So, but no, I've been working with computers for a long time. I'm now getting quite heavily buried in how to implement and integrate AI systems into company information systems. That's all experimental and research type work. I'm always researching and looking up something. I love learning. It's sort of been the modus operandi. So yeah, no, I'm full active. I go out night shooting on neighbours' farms because I do a lot of pest control for them until midnight. Wake up at 3 and 4 in the morning, and I'm always awake at 3 and 4 in the morning. That comes from a kid when we were milking cows, and just got into the habit of waking up at 4 in the morning. I worked for 20 years when the kids were born, getting up at 3 in the morning to work until 7 because then I could knock off early afternoon because prior to that I just wasn't seeing the family and I wasn't going to sacrifice family life, so I just simply turned the day around and work early rather than late, and that worked really well. Then I retired, so to me retirement was actually sleeping in until 7.
Right.
Then I run a full day.
Right. So based on your experience and 8 years of experience
Mm.
and keto before that, um, if someone said to you, like you've got a friend that says, okay, look, I'm done with trying to deal with these chronic problems. I want what you've got. Tell me what to do. What advice would you give them to get started with carnivore?
Yeah, the big thing would be to just commit to it for a minimum of 3 months and preferably 6. That usually blows most people away. But if you really want to see the health benefits that are going to come out of it, just commit to it. It's only 6 months. And then sit down and make a conscious choice. Is this for me or not? Do I want to go back? I've had people that, yeah, maybe I'll do it for 2 weeks. I say, well, you're not going to get anywhere in 2 weeks. And I stopped evangelizing about all this when I was at a Christmas party, and a guy came up to me and said, well, what do you do? You look slim and trim. What do you do? I said, well, I'm not going to tell you. He said, why not? Because you don't want to know the answer. I knew by this stage, nobody wants to know the answer. No, I'm not. So I walked away. He kept pestering all afternoon. Tell me, what are you doing? What's different? Well, I mean, what? In the finish, I said, look, you really, really want to know? He said, yeah, right. Eat meat. That's it. He just spun around and went and walked off. So no, that was a fail. And to be honest, I've never convinced a single person to do what I'm doing, and that's probably been the biggest challenge because socially, I think my friends and family persevere with me out of the kindness of their heart, but it's socially difficult. That's probably the most difficult part. And it's only been recent times that I can go out to a restaurant and just simply ask the waitress, can I get the sirloin steak, please, and nothing else? The first time I did that, the lady, no potatoes, no, just the steak. She took it back to the chef, and the chef said to her, how the hell am I going to make this look attractive? She said, stick it on a big white plate. She brought the big white plate back, and it was delicious. It was perfect. But I think the word is getting out there a little bit. I've done it recently at a restaurant, just asked them for the sirloin steak and nothing else. And she didn't bat an eye, took it to the chef, and what came back out was not just the sirloin steak, but it had a big knob of butter on top. So he knew exactly what I liked, for most
Right.
carnivores.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it really is starting to, the news about it's really starting to spread, you know. I mean,
Mm,
in Japan, not so much, but I was in Australia recently and I was able to strike up a conversation with people who are not doing carnivore simply by them realizing what I was doing, going, oh, yeah, I've heard of that. Tell me more
yeah.
about it, you know.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting journey to see where this goes because, I mean, what I've learned just in recent weeks in listening to your podcast in particular, I think the story after story after story of the huge health challenges that people have faced and resolved, maybe not fully, but got back to a point where they can live life again was hugely inspiring. And the biggest criticism I get leveled at me is the fact that there's no research on the long-term outcomes of the carnivore diet. No, because nobody's done any. That doesn't invalidate all of the personal stories that are coming out where it's had transformative effects. So, do we know
Exactly.
long term what the effect is going to be on carnivore? I don't know. It might cause long term health problems. I don't think so personally, but it's possible. We don't have the proof one way or the other. But I tell you what,
Mm.
compared to the problems that I had prior to going carnivore, I'm not going to risk going back.
That's right. It's pretty clear what the long-term outcomes are from standard dieting, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The
It's
evidence
all
is
around
all
me.
around us in the supermarket, right?
I sort of almost live in despair at some level because you walk downtown around central town and you see people my age and younger and they're hobbling around with their hip bent at the hips because they're in pain with their knees or their hips. They're hugely overweight. They can barely get along the footpath. Then you go into the supermarket and you see these trolleys just loaded to the gunnels with all this junk food. And I just feel sorry for them because I know what the impact is going to be. And I've got people in my age group who are getting cancer, who have got multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, dementia. My best mate died from the metabolic issues. And when you sit there and think just how unnecessary all this anguish and pain and ill health is, it's sad on a global scale.
Yeah. It's really sad when you see, like, when we were in high school, you know, we might not have been in the perfect health, but we were certainly a lot healthier than kids these days. We see kids
Oh,
these
yeah.
days dealing with the health issues of the middle age. It's kind of like you look at that and go, it's the meat, is it? It's the meat that's causing those problems, is it?
Yeah, that's right. It's such a ludicrous concept. I've sat in a theatre with a young kid in front of me, his mother and probably about 12 or 13-year-old. He came in and I was quite staggered. She didn't touch anything, but he had one of the great big pots of popcorn. He had a huge big drink of some sort of soft drink. He had bags of lollies and chocolates and all sorts of things. And that got him halfway through the movie. He had to go back out and load up again with another lot. And you look at this kid, he was hugely overweight. And you just know that by the time he's a 20-year-old, he's in serious trouble.
Yeah, because the damage is being done now. It's, you know, he
Exactly.
might be able to run around and everything's okay at the moment, but the damage has already started.
Yep.
Mm. Yeah. So, Steve, if people want to reach out to you, is there a way they can get in contact? Do you have any social media?
I've got a Facebook page, but quite frankly, I keep off social media most of the time. It's not that I have anything much against it. I just think there's an awful lot of garbage on there, and I spend all my days on computers working professionally. The last thing I want to do is go and do, social media type stuff at night. So yeah, I have a Facebook page, steve.lewin@qlbs.com, but I look at it probably 3 times a year. I don't have Twitter accounts or any other thing. If anybody really wants to get hold of me, they can get hold of me just through my email, which is steve.lewin@qlbs.com.
No worries. I'll link to your email in the show notes.
People have got to find this in their own way.
Mm.
But I just really appreciate what you're doing, because I think showing people stories, especially that recent one you put out where you just had clip after clip after clip for half an hour of people just saying, this is gone, that's gone, I had this and I was suffering from this, it's gone, that's gone, this is gone. Hugely inspiring.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll put your email in the show notes. And Steve, really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks, Dave. Keep doing what you're doing.